Donald Trump's big, beautiful bill is blowing up in his face wherever he looks. And right now, he's looking towards the Senate, where not only did we see him attack Thom Tillis to the point of retiring for his opposition to the agenda, but now he has launched an all-out campaign against Rand Paul, who is delivering knockout blows to Trump's agenda that have him losing his mind. We're going to get into all of it, but of course, we have to start with Rand Paul and what he said to trigger Trump's meltdown.
Senator from Kentucky.
In deciding whether to vote for the big, not-so-beautiful bill, I've asked a very specific question. Will the deficit be more or less next year? The answer, without question, is this bill will grow the deficit. The federal government has fancy formulas and hundreds of wonky accountants who inform us of their projections over 10 years. But you often can't trust these projections. In an excellent piece written by the Foundation for Economics and Education entitled "The CBO's Projections Are Worse Than Useless," Eric Schuler writes, "Long-term analysis and language is commonplace in U.S. national politics, but it achieves no useful outcome. It confuses far more than it clarifies. It does not provide accurate estimates of long-term results. It does not improve the average voter's understanding of policy effects. And it gives politicians a means to claim they are being fiscally responsible without actually ever exercising any prudence whatsoever. Sometimes the predictions are off because a new Congress is elected and changes the law. Eric Schuler writes that for any projection of a 10-year budget to be accurate, the Congressional Budget Office has to assume that the law won't change for 10 years, even as most of the politicians that make the laws risk being replaced every 2 years, and all of them advocate for changes of one stripe or another. Schuler states that few in Washington will admit Congress has a knack for starting any proposed cuts in the later years while letting spending run wild in the immediate future. Sometimes these predictions are off by $1 trillion or so because the economy grew more slowly or more quickly than anticipated. Bruce Thompson, a former Senate aide and Assistant Secretary of Treasury, writes, "The Congressional Budget Office miscalculated the deficit last year by $1 trillion. So in deciding whether to vote for any big, monstrous bill, it helps to ask the right question. To me, the most pertinent question is how will the bill affect the deficit in the next year? Currently, our deficit is estimated to be a little under $2 trillion this year. What will happen to the debt in 2026 if this bill passes? Well, using the math most favorable to the supporters of the bill, referred to as the policy baseline, the deficit in 2026 will still be $270 billion more than this year. So even using the math, even using the formulas that the supporters of the bill like, the deficit will grow by $270 billion next year. That's just not good if you profess to be fiscally conservative. Why will the deficit grow next year? Well, even if you argue that the 2017 tax cuts don't need to be counted in the calculation at all, the new tax cuts add up to $234 billion to the debt next year. In addition, the big, not-so-beautiful bill adds new spending of over $500 billion, military, border, agricultural subsidies, etc. That spending is front-loaded and will be spent in the first 4 years of the 10-year window. Legislated spending is one of the few items in the bill that is exact. It isn't estimated. If they say they'll spend $500 billion, they're going to spend $500 billion, all in the first few years. So in order not to add to the deficit, the BBB, the big not-so-beautiful bill, has to have corresponding spending cuts to counter all the new spending. Unfortunately, the spending cuts are backloaded to the final 5 years of the 10-year window when several tax cuts expire and the spending increases are finished. In addition, elections occur every 2 years and could easily wipe out any perceived savings that might occur in the later years. The only real certainty in this budget drama are the budget years coming in the immediate future.
I in no way consider myself to be a conservative person, but if you are, Rand Paul is making a great case for why you should not support this bill. And even more than the cuts to Medicaid, which Democrats have been talking about nonstop, I actually do appreciate that his focus is on an issue that we may not be talking about in the same way, whether you like the perspective he is taking or not. Of course, we've seen senators like Ron Johnson in opposition to this bill who are mad it doesn't throw enough people off their health care. But I think this is an important point to make about how little Republicans actually care about the deficit. Rand Paul said that they would own this crisis if they voted for this bill, and it's the reason Trump is bringing out the threats once again, and we can see that right here. Trump wrote on Truth Social, "For all cost-cutting Republicans, of which I am one, remember, you still have to get re-elected. Don't go too crazy. We will make it all up times 10 with growth more than ever before." So the threats of primaries are really coming out strong for Donald Trump. This is all he has left. This is cult to rely on to get his terrible agenda across the finish line. And there still is a possibility that more Republicans come out against this agenda. And it might be helped by the fact that Democrats are making such a great case against it. And we saw that with Senator Patty Murray in this clip right here.
President.
I recognize the senator from Washington State.
I thank the senator from Oregon and our other budget chairs, ranking members from previous years, because this is really important. Mr. President, there are some things you can't change with legislation, despite what my colleagues on the other side of the aisle seem to believe. For example, 1 + 1 is 2. And while $1 trillion might have a lot of zeros in it, it is, in fact, a much, much bigger number. Now, that might sound obvious, but apparently my colleagues across the aisle need a little reminder, because right now, Republicans are pretending not to get it. It is almost beyond belief, and it is certainly beyond common sense. After years of complaining about the debt, in fact, at the same time they're talking about how we need to address the debt, Republicans now are suddenly pretending they don't know how to count. Republicans are suddenly pretending the parliamentarian doesn't exist if they don't talk to her. Republicans are suddenly pretending that precedent doesn't exist if they just fake amnesia, and that norms and consequences for breaking them will just disappear if they wish it away really hard. My preschool students had more common sense. Republicans should know if they replace math with magic, if they tear up the Senate process, if they blow off the Senate parliamentarian, that bill will come due. And not just the bill for $4 trillion blown on tax cuts for billionaires and corporations. The bill will also come due for trashing this Senate process and precedent when Republicans are no longer in the majority. Mr. President, if Republicans are serious about plowing forward with rewriting or ignoring Senate procedure and the laws of mathematics, I just ask, spare me the empty excuses. Spare me the explanations that totally ignore the reality of what you are doing. I mean, do they really think it washes away everything to say, oh, it's fine to break the process in half because we say it's fine? Oh, it's fine. We have the authority to ignore math. Give me a break. To every Republican who really thinks that is a convincing argument, to anyone who thinks we can is just an acceptable rationale for going nuclear and pretending the most expensive bill in the history of our country can be paid for by some magic bean counting, here is my challenge to you. Go back home and try that game with your constituents. Tell them, it's okay, yes, the debt's going to be $4 trillion, higher 10 years from now. That's true. But it's fine. We voted on it. And we get to say $1 trillion is actually 0. Go ahead. See how that works for you. And you may as well tell them you are voting against gravity next, because that's just as reasonable. And don't forget, when you tell your families back home that trillions of dollars in tax cuts for billionaires and companies are free because you waved a wand or you said some magic words, don't forget to tell them Those are just tax cuts for the billionaires, not for working families. Don't forget to tell the folks back home, yeah, I voted to say $1 trillion is nothing, but we still need to kick people off of their health care. That's just too expensive. We still need to close those hospitals. We have to cut costs, and we still have to kick people off SNAP because the debt is out of control. And don't forget to mention that, no, we can't afford childcare. We can't afford paid family leave. We can't afford to solve your problems. Magic math is apparently just for billionaires. You all are getting less. Please, Republicans, send that message to your constituents. Just see how it goes over. Because you can fool yourself, but you are not going to fool the American people. They don't get to balance their budget with magic math. They don't get to pretend $1 trillion is nothing. And they don't get to pretend that this bill is free. Because at the end of the day, regardless of what policy baseline you all want to use in D.C., those families back home, they're the ones who will be paying the actual cost. I yield back to the Senator from Oregon.
I yield to a question.
I would.
In the time that you were budget chair, did you ever contemplate a situation in which you argued that renewing a tax break that was by law expiring would somehow have no impact on the deficit?
To my friend from Oregon, I never would have contemplated it, and I never would have put it forward, and I happen to know that if I had have suggested that my Republican colleagues would have been all over me telling me that breaks the rules.
Thank you.
We all know that this is an abomination. Even the Republicans voting for this bill will call it that. That's what we heard from Josh Hawley, who warned about the millions who will lose their health care and the broader damage done to the healthcare infrastructure in our country. But it just shows how little they care about the actual job of service, or how hypocritical that they are, that they're so willing to fall in line with Donald Trump. But we will certainly be calling it out on this show. And if you want to support that, as always, you can hit that subscribe button, leave a like on this video, and if you stuck around to the end, drop a blue heart in the comments. And until next time, I'll see you soon.